So a couple of weeks ago, I had an email from the Medic portal for their newsletter. And it's a newsletter that I recommend any aspiring medical student signs up for. It has some really useful information about the applications process, about the UCAT, about different universities and their entry requirements. Definitely worth checking out. Definitely recommend signing up for it. I'll put the link down in the description. So in the newsletter that I had from them, I actually found a really interesting piece about a new apprenticeship that is being developed for entering medicine. So it's currently a pilot scheme which will take on an estimate of about 100 students every year. This is probably subject to change, I'd imagine, especially with it being a pilot scheme, and it's set for approval by the end of the year. So what's very interesting about this apprenticeship is that the BMA have mentioned that this is going to have a very heavy focus on primary care, perhaps to help drive up more recruitment for primary care roles in the healthcare system. The great thing about this new apprenticeship is that this is going to make medicine a lot more accessible by adding yet more routes into medicine for all different types of students from all different walks of life. Because one of the brilliant things about an apprenticeship is that obviously you get paid while you learn. So you get paid to learn, basically, which is a fantastic alternative to going to university and racking up student debt. That being said, though, this still may not be the most optimum way to study medicine, which I will get into later on in the video. Okay, so let's talk about entry requirements, which is probably the elephant in the room here. This is very difficult because there is actually a document released by the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, which I'll include in the description down below. And it doesn't mention too much about entry requirements, unfortunately. The only thing that we do know is that this is going to be left up to the individual places that take on this apprenticeship. So it could end up being a similar model to universities where, they kind of pick the entry requirements on a case-by-case basis, depending on the area and the kind of students that they will potentially have coming into this apprenticeship. But one very interesting thing about this apprenticeship and this way into medicine is that it's actually available for any kind of student. So you can be a would-be undergraduate student or you can be a postgraduate student. So it gives a lot of flexibility in one way of entering medicine, which is fantastic. So for instance, you could be finishing up a biomedical sciences degree, for instance, and let's say you want to do medicine, but the postgraduate route feels a bit unappealing because of the cost, because it's an expensive thing, postgraduate education. The apprenticeship really kind of allays that fear because, you're being paid on the job while doing it. So that makes it a lot more accessible for maybe, would-be postgraduate students that have concerns about finance. So one thing, unfortunately, when it comes to entry requirements is that there is no mention of access course students in this document at all, which is a bit of a shame, but I'm hoping that because it's looking like it's going to be left up to the individual places that end up taking on this apprenticeship, that they will have different entry requirements for each that might be a bit more flexible when it comes to what kind of qualifications they will accept. So it might not just be your average GCSE and A-level qualifications, but we won't know until this ends up actually coming into the wild and, we can actually see what the applications process actually looks like for this particular apprenticeship. And one thing to note as well, the document does state, not explicitly, but implicitly, that the qualifications typically required to enter medicine will be required here as well. So there is no getting away from the UCAT or the BMAT or whatever it may end up being for this particular apprenticeship. So of course, this apprenticeship will last 5 years, just as a normal medical degree would in university. And by the end of it, you will come out with a completely valid medical degree that you can use to apply for a medical license from the GMC. So these 5 years are split up into what is called OTJs. And OTJ days are basically just on-the-job days. And they're kind of like course modules at university. So for instance, what will happen is you'll have 7 days for learning about, on-the-job learning about, patient-doctor communication. And I'd imagine some of the OTJs are actually more academic-based and lecture-based. So they are working with different university hospitals and medical schools. I'd imagine some of those OTJs would also comprise of, actually attending lectures and things like that as well. So unfortunately, that's about as much information as we have on this at this point. The document doesn't really detail too much more other than the OTJ and obviously describing what the role will end up being once you come out of it, which is, obviously a doctor. So that's nothing we don't already know. But I think it's now important that we talk about the pros and cons when it comes to this apprenticeship, because obviously this is a very, very unusual way to enter medicine, which will definitely have its ups and downs. So let's talk about those. So of course, the first and biggest benefit to doing an apprenticeship, especially for medicine, is the money. So when you consider going to university for medical school, you are going to rack up student debt. and that is going to be, £9,250 worth of tuition fee every year. And when you calculate that for a foundation course, then that's 6 years worth, and that's £55,000. That is a lot of student debt, and we're not even talking about maintenance loans. So obviously, doing an apprenticeship has it has a massive benefit here when it comes to the cost of living and the cost of educating yourself, because you will at least get paid minimum wage. So of course, one of the other benefits to this is that it's a little bit more flexible applications wise. So while postgraduates aren't actually excluded from trying to apply for undergraduate medicine, it's more complicated from a financial perspective, which obviously in an apprenticeship context you're not going to have that problem, which is fantastic because obviously you're getting paid on the job. So it gives you yet another option you can use to apply if you are postgraduate, because you can apply for postgraduate. If you have the money, you can also apply for undergraduate, and then you can also apply for an apprenticeship. So that's 3 ways of getting into medicine, which will boost your chances dramatically. So obviously another big benefit to doing medicine through an apprenticeship would be hands-on experience from the very start. Obviously, medicine is a very hands-on profession, and while medical schools are now actually doing more hands-on clinical practice from an earlier stage in the degree, obviously an apprenticeship will start straight away. And that is great because you're building up clinical skills straight from day one. I'm assuming, obviously we don't really know how exactly this course is going to be structured when it's in its final form. And I think it's safe to assume that you're going to be getting quite a lot of exposure to patient contact from day one. So let's take a little look at the cons, to which unfortunately there are quite a few. This has some catches, and I think they're definitely worth talking about. So the first thing I want to point out, which I'm quite concerned about when it comes to this apprenticeship, is of course intensity. So medicine is quite an intense degree, generally, if you go the medical school route, and there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of exams, there's a lot of academic pressure. Now, when it comes to an apprenticeship, great, you're going to be learning a lot on the job, but how much academia are you going to be doing alongside that? How many lectures are you going to be attending, if any at all? I don't know how this is going to be structured, but at the same time, you are going to clearly have tests to do. You're going to clearly have to have you're going to clearly have to study science in order to do this at the same time as doing on-the-job work as an apprentice doctor. I don't know how the pressures are going to pile up on a prospective student like that. I don't know how that's going to affect their mental health or how it will affect your experience learning how to become a doctor. So that's one thing that's really worth considering when it comes to applying for medicine through an apprenticeship. So my second one, and to be honest, for me, this really isn't a concern because I'm quite an introverted person and I'm not going into university for the social experience, but it's a very important element of student life, and I think it's worth considering, especially if you're quite extroverted and enjoy a social outlet. And that is, of course, the lack of a social element to the medical apprenticeship. Now, obviously, you will be working alongside other apprentices, I'm sure, but you're not going to have access to a university campus, for instance. Well, I'd imagine you wouldn't. So I'd imagine you wouldn't have access then to, all the benefits that university brings. So things like societies, the university libraries and things like that. It's possible that you might not have access to those things. So that is something also worth considering as well. And another thing that really worries me about this is that it is a pilot scheme. What if they get halfway through it and they find that it's not suitable or it's not working, or maybe they find that, the students aren't coming out quite as qualified as they'd like, because obviously the one thing that the BMA has talked about when it comes to this entrance into medicine is that they want to make sure that people who come out the other end of this apprenticeship are equally qualified to those who have done the medical school route. So obviously that is a worry because it could fold halfway through, and I don't know where that would leave you as an apprentice. And that brings me to my final set of concerns, which is actually the concerns of general practitioners. So there's an interesting article on this apprenticeship available for you to read on the General Practitioner magazine Pulse Today, which I'll include a link of in the description down below. And the article is great. It's very informative. Definitely recommend that you read it. But the comments are a little bit worrying. Obviously, these are all GPs who are commenting on this particular article, and I think it's worth taking their perspectives into account, considering that this course is going to have a heavy focus on primary care. So, yeah, there are quite a few concerns brought up by the general practitioners in this comment section. Some of them may be unfounded, because it appears that some of them think that this isn't going to be a degree route, and this is actually going to give you a degree when you come out the other end. However, there are some very valid concerns being pointed out here about the apprenticeship route. One of them being intensity. So one doctor commented about, the concerns of intensity. So obviously medical school is quite intense anyway. Medical students don't tend to have a lot of time just because of the sheer volume of content they have to cover. And I can't imagine this being much better with an apprenticeship, but worse yet, on top, you're also going to have, a lot of on-the-job learning experiences alongside the more academic side of things as well. How that will end up playing out, who knows? That, those concerns could end up being unfounded. We won't know until the pilot scheme has actually started. So then the other thing that people have brought up consistently in the comment section for this is that it could end up dumbing down the curriculum for medicine if you do the apprenticeship route. This could be a valid concern. We don't know what the quality of education will be like learning medicine through on-the-job training, obviously with a mix of traditional academic education alongside it, I'd imagine. But nonetheless, it's definitely something worth taking into account. That being said, the BMA and, Health Education England have been working very closely together alongside other medical boards to make sure that this course is well put together and that it will end up, achieving what it sets out to achieve. But at the same time, I think it's worth taking these things into account when, you consider applying for something like this. So that is the medicine apprenticeship. That's at least all the information I know about it in its current form. I will probably do more videos on this topic in the future as more information becomes available. It's worth considering. There's a lot to think about with this. There are some cons, there are some fantastic pros. I think it also serves as a bit of hope as well, because, again, this is yet another way to apply for medicine, which can boost your chances of actually getting into medicine. So thank you for watching, and if you like the video, please give it a like. And if you want to see more of my content, subscribe, and we should hopefully be seeing more content coming from me in the coming weeks. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.